Do you want my husband? Is it on there that the university stuff?
Okay.
There for a minute.
Sure.
Turn off the video, but your microphone's on.
Right. Hold on a second. Let me get to the slide. All right, here you go.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yes.
All right, so let me do an introduction for this series that is new. So welcome to the inaugural Sydney Lecture Series. My name is Michael Kent, your host for this series. Thank you for joining us today. If you're here live or participating in the future, if you come to this after we've got saved. And we look forward to seeing you again online one day if you've come to this after the fact. Lectures are currently open to anyone who wants to participate in a lecture and classroom experience. However, if these lectures become too large down the road, I may need to limit the number of live participants for each class. We'll see what happens, but hopefully we won't have that problem. Over the next 11 months, I've scheduled lectures by leaders in the field of public relations and communication. Each lecture will take place on the last Friday of the month through November 2020. A calendar of all the year's speakers and topics is available, and details will be posted each month about upcoming speakers and topics. Depending on the popularity and need down the road, I may increase the frequency of the lectures to 2 per month, but for now we're going to stick to the 1 lecture per month and see how it goes this first year. I created this series primarily for the benefit of my own doctoral students. However, I hope that the lectures are valuable to any communication or public relations student who tunes in down the road. For those of you unfamiliar with doctoral education in Australia and many other countries, doctoral students don't take any actual classes. All of the learning that takes place is self-directed or at the direction of their advisors. What this means is that if a student wants to learn about a particular theory or research method and their advisor is not already an expert in that area, the student has to teach themselves or learn it together with their advisor. As brilliant as I think I am, and my many Australian colleagues, no one can give a student the richness and valuable experience that comes from taking a dozen or more actual classes with recognized experts in their field. And that's what this lecture series is about, is to try to bring those people together. So I've asked speakers to run their lectures like an actual doctoral class rather than some sort of TED Talk or presentation. These lectures are not intended as presentations where you sit back passively and listen to the speaker talk, but as an actual classroom where you will be asked to participate and think about some different issues and concepts and ideas. When you listen to Maureen Taylor today, you're being exposed to a bit of the actual classroom experience that her own doctoral students have received. Please take advantage of this valuable opportunity by doing the assigned reading before each class that you attend. Now that the preamble is out of the way, let me introduce Maureen Taylor. Maureen Taylor is a professor at UTS, the University of Technology, Sydney, and a leader in the field of public relations and communication. For more than 2 decades, she's conducted research and influenced members of the field. She's written dozens of influential articles, book chapters, reports, conference papers. She's received many awards and accolades over her career. Maureen Taylor is an ICA Fellow, a member of the Arthur Page Society, a Pathfinder Award recipient, and has one of the highest H scores in the discipline. I encourage you to visit her Google Scholar page and look her up. And in fact, look up everyone in future lectures so you know who's giving your talk and you know more about them. Maureen has also advised many doctoral students over her career, some of whom will speak later this year, and many who we know to be excellent scholars in their own right. So beyond this brief introduction, I'm going to give you Maureen Taylor. Think of this as your first day in one of her doctoral seminars, and try to get the most out of it that you can. These are designed to last about an hour and a half each, so she has about an hour and a half left to do what she wants.
Okay, thank you. All right, now can everybody, I'm going to change the slide, and I want to make sure that everybody can see today's objectives. Just let me know that you can see it. Just somebody say yes.
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 All right.
Yes,
excellent.
we can see it.
All right. So all good lectures have objectives. And again, this is like a seminar. So you're actually going to have to do some work today. So here's what I want to do. I want to sort of talk about public relations in society, right? We've got a lot of research about organization, public relationships, crisis, social media crisis, more social media. I want to talk about how we can rethink what public relations is in society. And I'm going to do that through tracing my intellectual journey of studying public relations. And I'm going to conclude with some food for thought for you on what you might be able to do if you're interested in this topic, okay? And if you do have questions, I have the hand waving thing I think works, but if it doesn't, just ask. Just say, Maureen, I got a question, because this is a seminar. So here's the first thing I'm going to ask you. What are some assumptions that you make about communication? And I want somebody start, say your name, where you're from, and then answer the question. What are the assumptions, right? Because doctoral work is all about making manifest the implicit assumptions that guide our understanding of our world. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Yay, Kim Johnston.
Hello. That people have capacity to communicate.
All right, so, and define capacity.
That they can, they have the skills, knowledge and ability to express a point, understand a point, respond to a point.
Okay, that's good. So capacity. All right, great. What else? What other assumptions do we make about communication?
Hello, I'm Alvin. I think communication in a very like old-fashioned excellence theory view is like two-way. Like if you want to communicate, you have to speak and listen. So it's a relational concept that when communication happens, that there are it should be at least like two agents that are involved in the process. Somebody is speaking and the other one is interpreting and listening.
Excellent. What else? What other assumptions do you make?
From QE, I think we assume that communication automatically attracts focus, that people, when we speak, somebody listens, and, back to the good old the message receiver model, that our communication has some impact. And on the subject of communication, while I've just put the floor for a second, can I please respectfully ask other participants to perhaps mute their microphones and turn off their videos when they're not participating? Really
Okay, sounds better.
Yeah, I'm hearing background noise from people. So, Diana, I'm not sure if it's yours.
Could be, because in the room next to us, it's,
yeah.
yeah.
So I'm hearing lots of noise, and it just makes it hard.
So you can mute, mute while you're not speaking.
Yes.
Yeah, and then speak when you want to speak. Okay, so Shima, I see that you also we need you muted. Can you mute? Do you see where mute is? There you go. Good girl. Okay, and keep going. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I just totally lost connection there, so I'm coming back. Yeah, so the idea is that our communication is both received and in some way responded to and has an effect and an impact, which I know is a model that's been largely credited, but it's amazing how much that assumption underpins everything that we do.
Excellent. Good. Who else has assumptions?
May I add to this? I'm Anna. Do you hear me?
I can.
That communication can be intentional and unintentional.
Okay, excellent. What else? Anybody else want to talk about their assumptions that they make about communication?
May I add to this?
Sure.
It is necessary to build shared meanings among
Excellent.
individuals, among groups.
Excellent. All right. Anybody else want to add something?
Yeah, for me, I think it's also related to power and resources, that the ones with power and resources will be more able to, at least to the sending part of communication.
Okay, excellent. Power is implicit in that. Superb. All right. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that. Here's my second question that I need you to answer. How do you conceptualize public relations? Anyone can go first.
It's up to you, T. Stepping in again. Yeah, I think this presentation is very timely, because I think one of the things that I've noticed recently has been a shift in the way that I conceptualize public relations. The traditional kind of very strategic, functionalist, instrumentalist way of, this is something that an organization does to its stakeholders. We've seen then that merge into more of a, these are things we do to each other. And now what we're seeing is the rise of this societal level perception of public relations as something that is maybe generated out of organizational goals and objectives, but really has that societal level of both impact and responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you, Anne. What else? How others? So Anne sort of made a shift, it sounds like. Anybody talk about other ways that you conceptualize public relations?
Public relations provides relational, network, and rhetorical means for groups in society to express their ideas, debate those ideas, and create a shared meaning based on their evaluations.
All right, so back to shared meaning again. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. I see. I already know who's teaching you. All right. Anybody else want to share their conceptualization of public relations?
Alvin, and I think public relations is still a very relationship-focused science, and I think public relations can be conceptualized as a communication function to maintain, build relationships, and the relationships can be like at different levels. From the macro level, there are relationships between organizations, and there are relationship between organization and the public, or organization and the stakeholder, and also public relations can be used to maintain and build relationship among the stakeholders. So there are different levels of relationships that public relations can change to,
Excellent. I know who taught you too. Okay. It's so funny. You can actually see who studied what and with who. Superb. All right. Does anybody else want to add a different conceptualization of public relations? Or should we move on to the next one? Oh, go ahead.
Public relations is about engagement.
I know. All right. Can you operationalize engagement for us?
Well, engagement incorporates most of what people have already talked about, which is about relationships, but it's about the interaction and the quality of that interaction and what the outcome, both from the organisation and also the publics that we're dealing with. So we start to see a very more of a balanced approach to public relations that has shifted from the very organisational centric, what Anne mentioned, what organisations do for publics or to publics, to more of this balanced, co-creational, relationship centred, but it's a more ethical, balanced approach. It's idealistic, but that is really where I think we're moving to.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Well, sort of this is like preaching to the choir, because this presentation today, this class that we're having, is really about articulating that sort of societal approach to public relations. So this may seem very apparent to you who are on the call, but for a lot of people, public relations is still media relations. It's still corporate communication. It's still somebody said it perfectly, it's something that we do to others. Public relations does things to people. All right, I'm going to go on to the third question. What are public relations roles in organizations? What roles do we play?
Okay, I'm going to chip in from I think we still see a lot of this technician managerial divide, but I think we're also seeing the addition of a third level here, which is, again, looking for that impact at the societal level, looking way beyond the organizational boundaries and considering how organizations both influenced and influenced by societal level concerns. So I think that kind of much more of a meta level role is coming apparent, and that is largely being claimed as the role of public relations. Of course, it's obviously not called that because that's such a connotation-laden term, so you'll probably find they're given some fancy highfalutin title, but that's basically what they are.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add what other roles public relations plays in organizations?
Public relations help organizations to have voice in public sphere and also learn about others' voices, communities' voices, in order to like internalize those voices in their processes.
Excellent. It's so true. We often think of the role as actually doing something, but many times the most effective public relations is listening. And, you know, Jim McNamara, my colleague at UTS, he always is talking about organizational listening as one of the most important roles for public relations. Does anyone else have any other roles that they want to share?
I think.
So, please, you first. Aaron first.
Thank you. I think measuring the social impact of the organisation can also be a really crucial role for, particularly in community relations.
You're right, Erin. And Erin Riley is a new PhD student at University of Technology, Sydney. So she's going to be my student, and she comes from industry and has some really interesting work experience on engagement. So we're really happy to have her. I think that's great. You mentioned the term social impact and measuring. And I think a role for public relations is to be able to quantify and qualify the organization's contributions to society, not just the bottom line, investor relations and stocks and all of that, but also to be able to prove that the public relations function has value. Great. Okay, I'm going to go. I just have one more question. And so, and then you're going to have an exercise. So what is public relations role in society? And the reason that I'm asking this is the answers to these 4 questions will influence how you study public relations and how you, how you study it and what you will study. Oh, hold on. I got ahead. Slideshow, play from current slide. Go back. Okay. So really bad echo, Kim says. Okay.
No, that was earlier. It's fine now.
Oh, great. Okay. So what is public relations role in society? Have somebody answer that.
Its role is to enlighten choices in society, because when different voices can be debated in public sphere, then people can choose best ideas based on their interests.
Excellent. So one of our roles is to facilitate public discussions in society, of course representing our organization, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit or government or advocacy. Excellent. What else?
I may add to this. Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
I think it's also to empower the disempowered and to listen for the silent voices and make sure that there is an opportunity for those people, those groups who don't necessarily have a platform or have capacity to engage in discussions that ultimately will impact them, whether that's at an organisational level or a civic level. I think that's one of our key roles, is to provide that channel or that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So giving voice, especially to those who might not have it. Anna?
Yes, I would add to this that we build trust and relationships among different actors in the society, including organizations, communities, non-profits, government, and just people in general.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And trust really does matter, although trust is difficult. It's difficult to earn and it's easy to lose. Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about before we go into the exercise is this question about where do you sit in the room? So we have some PhD students, we have an associate professor, we have a senior lecturer, we have all these great people on the line. And the young people, I want to tell you about what sitting in the room means. All of us exist in a body of knowledge, whether it's from public relations, organizational communication, whatever area that people study. All of us sit in a spot in a room, and where we sit influences what we know and what we study and how we approach it. So one of my tasks is to really get people thinking about where do you sit in the room meaning public relations scholarship. Where do you tie back your assumptions of communication? Where do you see your affiliation when it comes to methodological choices, right? You know, the ontological, epistemological, and axiological assumptions that we all make. What you need to do early in your career is to know who you are and where you sit. For instance, some people might sit in more of the management perspective of public relations. Other people might sit more on the advocacy side of public relations. Some may be more political. So Alvin, you're getting a political communication degree at Annenberg. So you're sitting in the room around the political communication, and that will influence what you do. Over time, people's seats change, just like in a lecture, right? You don't come, actually people do really sit in the same seat, it seems like. So think about where do you sit and who are you drawing upon for your conceptual inspiration about what public relations is. So I'm going to move to, I took each of those questions and you're going to have to do this in a minute as well. So here's who I am, right? This is my sort of my intellectual journey that I want to share with you so that you can understand over the rest of the seminar where I'm coming from. So I believe that communication constructs our reality. Communication defines our world, and that rhetoric and persuasion are natural human behaviors, right? They can be distorted and made unethical, but being rhetorical and being persuasive is that which makes us human. So I make that as the foundational assumption of communication. So persuasion is good until it's bad. I believe that public relations is a force for good in the world. Rhetoric, as the discourse around society, is actually made manifest by public relations. It is the enactment of discourse, and it's essential for building and sustaining a society. Societies are strongest when there is discourse and when there is debate and discussions. It's unpleasant and it's so painful. Oh my gosh, it's painful, but it is how societies thrive. For me, public relations role is to help organizations anticipate and help their organizations change to meet societal expectations. That's why that listening is so important. And most of you had a component of listening in there. And that for me, public relations role in society is to create and to recreate the conditions. And the conditions mean, you know, working through the media, working through organizational members, having the organization be a good corporate or organizational citizen. For me, that's what we do, right? So we help our organization, but the larger goal is actually to help foster this public discussion and decision-making. And a lot of this comes from Robert Heath's idea of the fully functioning society. What I hope my research will contribute to is understanding how public relations builds relationships that build societies. And my place in the room is I started off in the center of a very small room. I got my PhD in 1996. 1992 was really the first books in public relations. 89, 90, 91, 92. So when I was getting my PhD, it was really the first research in public relations. Although there had been research before, this was the first research that was testing theory and developing theories. So I started off in a really small room, and I was at the middle of it because I was at a school that was known for public relations research. Over time, my position in the room has shifted. I now think I'm sitting on the edge of the room, right? If we go back to the, I'm like this guy right here. Can you see that? Can you see my cursor moving around?
There he is. You've got your back to us in that picture, haven't you?
Exactly. I'm all alone. I'm on the edge. I used to be like here, right? But now I'm over here because what I'm hoping is that I can change the field, right? I'm on the edge of the field and I'm listening to other conceptual frameworks like networks and engagement. And my task is to bring those back into the room. So over time, the room shifts. As dominant paradigms and conceptual frameworks shift, the room changes. And so I feel like I'm sitting on the edge of the room right now, and that the topics of networks and rhetoric and engagement are discussed differently, hopefully, and that I'm a part of that difference. So people, now it's your turn. Here's your first in-class assignment. Please fill in the blanks and be ready to share with others. So some of you have already articulated your assumptions about communication. So come up with a couple. Tell us what you believe public relations is, what its role in society is, and what its role in organization, and how your research will contribute to the development of the field of public relations. And then sort of tell us where you sit in the room, like who's influencing you right now, and what would you like to be doing in a few years? Can you do that?
Sure.
Yeah, if you want us to write something or yell out.
I think it wouldn't hurt to spend just a couple minutes writing down some keywords so that when you do present this, it's coherent and it can be efficient. So why don't we, right now, it is, let's see, I don't have time. How about you take 3 to 5 minutes to do that? Can you do that?
Yeah.
Sure. Yes.
All right, do it and be ready. Each person will present theirs. And I'll put mine up there again so you can sort of see the flow. But you don't need to do the ones that I did. Is anybody ready? If you are, you can unmute yourself. And I see, let's see. Unmute if you're ready. And if you're not, just keep writing. Though I am nervous, is anybody still there?
We're all
yeah.
here, Maureen.
Yes, you're still writing.
You've just given us a really hard thing to do at 9:30 in the morning, Brisbane time.
I know, I know. Erin, are you unmuted? Are you ready to talk?
No, that was accidental. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
You know, maybe we could just come back with the stuff we've got done now and start off our conversation, because my brain is buzzing with ideas at the moment. I'd love to hear what other people are thinking.
Okay, that's fine.
Give us a minute.
I can go first if you like.
I will. I'll give you guys 1 more minute. See, I can't see the clock here because I don't have I got like 9 things going on. So I'll give you 1 more minute, and then beloved Anna will go first. Go, girl. Okay. Why don't we start? We don't have to finish this. Actually, we're going to, I can also email this set of questions to you offline, so that it could be something that you think about as well. Again, these aren't easy answers, but they're fundamental questions that we have to answer to understand who we are and where we sit in the room of public relations research. Anna, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start. So I'm still shaping my view and I'm still shaping my world, but just here's where I'm sitting. Here's my room, my big one, which is still very, very flexible. So I also believe that communication constructs reality, creates meanings, helps people to exchange the meanings and to share those meanings so everyone understands. But I also believe that communication can be unintentional and intentional. So, you know, if the meaning has been shared, and even unintentional, it's still communication. And I also believe that public relations helps to construct the societies. I also believe that it helps to make the world a better place. It has the potential, it has the power, it can. And we have examples of it, multiple ones. In terms of organizations, here I'm a little bit, so I do believe there's a voice of public relations is the voice of organizations. I also believe that public relations is a voice of publics in the organizations. So in that case, I think that public relations is not only a voice, but also eyes, in a way that besides only knowing, understanding people and hearing them, public relations also think strategically and helping organizations move forward in terms of, you know, where they want to go, how they see themselves, what goals they need to set, what goals they need to achieve, what objectives they need to achieve. So I don't know, eyes as well as the voice. And I would like, with my research, to contribute to public relations, building better communities, building thriving communities, building better societies, helping people to get the most out of what they can do, and reveal the potential of those communities. So I guess I also see it in a societal engagement room perspective.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to talk?
I can talk.
Excellent. I think it's great that the PhD students are the first ones to tackle these, because you're at the beginning of your careers and these are really important questions. And Alvin just completed his comprehensive exam, so I suspect he's been thinking about this a lot.
Yeah, and I feel like my perspective of public relations is really influenced by IMA, my previous advisor. And for me, I think communication is inherently relational, and it takes many different forms and different levels, which leads to different fields like political communication, health communication, organizational communication. They are fundamentally, they are all about the messages transmitting through different channels that connect entities. For example, organizational communication, a lot of them focus on interorganizational relationships, how organizations build relationship with other organizations. And political communication is about political entities' communication with other entities through a relational channels. And health communication is about the message, how it transmits through different relational channels and how they impact different people. So my assumption about communication is inherently relational. And public relations, I believe that public relations is the force that is changing the relationships. And right now, because we have more data and the emergence of network society, so right now the conceptualization is that public relations not only changes relationships, but also change relationship network. And that's more from IMA's point that public relations is changing the network ecology, that the network ecology is a combination of all the different relationships that exist in the society. And so public relations roles in organization is to change organization's network position in a network ecology, while its role in the society is to change the whole network ecology. So it's trying to change different relationships between different entities. For example, between the organization and the public, which is OPR, and how it changed the relationship between organization and organizations, which is into the organizational communication relationships that was discussed in the readings. So in my current conceptualization, and I hope my research will contribute to how the impact, how the public dynamics, like how the public influence each other can influence the society and also influence the organizations. So I think most previous literature thinks of organizations as doing something to change something. So my perspective is that organizational publics and activists, they are doing something to change organizations. They are changing the society. So it's the other way around, how the public dynamics can change organization, how the public dynamics can change the society. And I don't know if I ever sit in the room because I'm doing a PhD in political communication, but I have some background in public relations. So methodologically, I have a lot of influence from the digital methods camp, like causal inference, digital relationships, experimental methods. But more theoretically, I hope I can contribute like the relationships within and between publics, how they can influence the organizations. So basically the other way around, instead of organizations changing public, but thinking about how publics can change organizations and the society.
Interesting, very interesting. Anybody else want to do it?
May I start?
Please.
My assumptions about communication is that communication constructs the reality, and also people need to be empowered to communicate effectively, to have voice in the public sphere. I believe that public relations help us to know the other, and it is a mean that binds groups in society together. and it helps us to have agency in our life. It empowers us to have agency in our life and in our destiny. The role of public relations in organizations is to, as I said, empower groups or organizations to have voice, to voice their interests, and also listen to other voices in the community in order to create a shared meaning that benefits all, not a shared meaning that benefits only a few powerful actors in society. My research is at the intersection of co-creational strategies and approaches, and activism. So I hope that my research can contribute to resource poor activists to bring voices of unprivileged communities into the play. And I hope there are many approaches that are introduced in public relations in order to, approaches that contribute to the co-creation of meaning, like network approaches or rhetorical approaches. I'm more interested in rhetorical approaches, but I also consider relational approaches as well. I hope to be able to present and discover other approaches or introduce other rhetorical approaches in public relations.
All right. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, the people who have spoken so far, and indeed people on this call, you're all sort of part of that new wave of thinking about public relations. And Kim, is this how you thought about public relations 10 years ago?
It's a hard question to answer. I mean, I like these questions, Maureen. No one's actually ever asked me this specific set of questions. So it's really good to think deeply about this. And my first go at this, because you don't often ask yourself these questions, it sort of just evolves through your writing and through your research. And a lot of what my assumptions are have been mentioned by others, that communication is central to co-creation of meaning. It does require effort, attention, action to understand who you're communicating with and what their assumptions are behind that act of communication. And sometimes that's about the motivation for communication that we need to really understand, and that the act of communication is really influenced by a whole range of for example, culture. It's informed by a range of influences that we also need to be mindful of, and it's facilitated through almost like a lens of meaning. And I think public relations is, and I've written here in my notes, perfectly positioned, and then I crossed it out and went well positioned. But anyway, public relations can be the facilitator, the enactor of a lot of those communication efforts. So to communicatively engage in different contexts for a range of outcomes that, benefit both society, individuals, organizations. So it's really at that middle point of that communication function. The role of public relations in organisations and in society is to facilitate that, and we've already mentioned, and I'm not going to repeat, things like listening, empowerment, relationships. But my research really aims to contribute to understanding how to better communicatively engage at different levels, so at that meso, macro, micro level, that add to facilitating those relationships and that communication. Where I sit in the room, I have got no idea. I'm probably in the middle somewhere. So if you go back to that picture, yeah, like I'm in the mix, and I think it depends on what I'm doing at the time and whether or not I'm doing the research. So if I'm in the middle of the research project, I'm probably in the middle. But if I'm, I don't know. I can't answer that question, Maureen. Where am I?
Okay. Well, I think actually you probably started off in the center of the room because of how you were trained as a PhD student with Jim Everett, not McNamara.
Yep.
But I think that your work on engagement, at first it was on the outskirts of the room, like this guy here, right? But I think engagement has become more central to the field as a conceptual framework to guide thinking and practicing public relations. So the nice thing about sitting in a room is that if you're an active scholar, you change, right? It's actually, I feel badly for the people who are one-trick ponies, who are in the center of the room and never move from it because they are just doing derivative research that again and again studies the same thing and does what Kuhn argued is called mopping up, right? So that the topics that Anna and Alvin and Kim, you and Shima, I mean, you guys are on the edge of the room because you have all these new ideas and new conceptual frameworks. And that's, Thomas Kuhn says that again, he says that the people who change a field are either very young or come from outside the field. And they bring in those conceptual frameworks from political science, sociology, economics, let's see, Anna, you love experimental design now. All of these conceptual frameworks. Anna's working on a theory of play as public relations, which is unique and different and will change how we think about interactions. So I would say, Kim, you probably started off pretty clear in the center. I think your engagement research brought you to the edge, but then the field embraced engagement research, and now you're back in the middle again.
Okay, that's me.
You're just, you're changing seats.
That's right, absolutely.
All right, excellent. So what I'm gonna do, there's a bunch of you who haven't got to talk yet, but I think there'll be a chance at the end. We're actually gonna do this exercise one more time if we have the time. What's that? Oh, like somebody in the background. All right, we'll go back to this later. All right, so I'm going to go through this really quickly because it strikes me is that almost everyone on this call is sort of, I think if we used a network approach, we're all connected and we've all sort of made a similar shift in how we think about public relations. So in a PhD seminar, sometimes you plan on covering content and then you discover that everybody already accepts it, so you don't got to go through it. So I'll just go through this really quickly and then try to get to some of the other stuff because we only have about 35 minutes. So the interesting thing is this is such an exciting time in the field of public relations because everything is being contested and changing. Again, when I started, there was nothing contested, right? There was symmetry. It was our only theoretical framework, unless we begged or borrowed something from MassCom or OrgCom. Today, there's all these different conceptual frameworks that we're applying to think about relational communication or engagement. And the reason that the definition of public relations that we use is so powerful is it will influence how you study it and it will influence how you practice it. That's why I think with our undergraduates, we have to go through this discussion about public relations, its history and its current conceptualizations, because they're the ones who are going to be practicing it. And if we give them better frameworks or multiple frameworks for thinking about the practice, maybe immediately they won't be able to because they don't have power, but eventually they will have power and they can change how public relations is practiced. So old school, right? Does this definition look familiar to anybody?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Grooming in 1984. Right. So when I was growing up in the 90s, right, in graduate school, public relations was organization meetings, we would then be respected and have the greatest chance in the 1980s and early 90s to make the you can try to shape a message and you can try to shape a strategy. This is a definition that I like, not because from here. I think the publics, and of course the idea of GA. We are viewed as a So in the 90s, most research was organizational centric. So we studied, I call it studying ourselves to death, right? There was a lot of surveys of practitioners telling us how much time they spend on writing or G. Functional, right? That treated public relations as that which accomplishes the organization's goals. And so our job as an information disseminator, right? And so that our tasks were persuasion, which again, nothing's wrong with persuasion. I love persuasion. Media relations, agenda setting, and issues management. The difference though is that today's public relations moves a little bit past the functional approach because a couple of you have used the term co-creation, right? So we've made a little bit of a shift. It's not just one-way communication from the organization communication socially way that arguing for. So our first approach is dysfunctional, right? And again, this is the way it's done, right? Erin, you worked in PR, right? There is a dissemination and an influence component to it, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And you also saw sort of the co-creational component, right? When you were working in engagement? Erin?
Yeah, certainly. There's been there's a lot of both.
A lot of both. And what I'm arguing is that they work together perfectly and that sometimes the co-creational approach is dominant and other times the functional is. But I want to argue that there's another way of looking at this. And this is this idea of civil society, right? There's a third path that we think about public relations as a rhetorical force for creating the conditions necessary for the formation of civil society. And so the 2011 piece that I sent out, and if you haven't had time to read it, no problem, I'm going to summarize a few parts of it. But so there's rhetoric, right, which is essentially persuasion and talk and interaction. And then there's the public relations aspect that creates the conditions for that discourse to have an impact on society. Talk without public relations, right? Rhetoric without public relations doesn't go far. Right? It doesn't help organizations change. So the two are central, and that we use rhetoric, public relations uses rhetoric, and society uses rhetoric to make decisions and to sustain a society as a good place to live. right? And I can't, this has been, it's been a really hard year for maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. It just seems to me that many things are just unsettled and that we're not moving forward. And I have like this vision of how we could change this by opening up opportunities for engagement, for structuring dialogue, and for essentially using communication to create a society that's a good place for everybody to live. And so one of the terms that's emerged out of this sort of third path is the idea of social capital. And social capital and civil society are really linked. And for those of you who read Eric Sommerfeld's 2013 piece, which by the way, he won Article of the Year for, because it was such a nice conceptual piece arguing for civil society. And I'll give you a little bit of background on that paper. So that was the one, the Public Relations Review, the civility of civil society. A lot of people critique the idea of civil society, and I'll get to that in a slide, because of the term civil, because the opposite is, of course, uncivilized or incivil. And Eric wrote this paper arguing that actually, no, that's not how it works. The idea of civil society is, and he talked about from a public sphere perspective. And he draws on the idea that civil society is a network of associations and groups, kind of like what Alvin is studying, right? He's studying networks. And that civil society provides an alternative way of thinking about the discursive nature of the public sphere, right? That civil society and Hauser's work, the 98 piece that I cite right here and that I think Eric cites, if you're interested in this topic, I would go read Gerald Hauser's 1998 piece of this idea of nested interactions in society that all together help to contribute to civil society. So here's my question. It's time for you to participate again. How can public relations foster civil society?
Eric says by developing social capital.
Okay, and what social capital?
Eric introduces two kinds of social capital. One is the bonding social capital, strong ties, that is very strong in underdeveloped or developing communities, and also the generalized relationship, which is about weak ties, which means linking those communities with strong ties together.
Excellent, excellent. I see. I think you must have peeked ahead at my slides or something. Shima, there's a little bit of a reverberation when you're speaking.
Yes, because we are also actually have it on a screen because I have other people here.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
That's fine. All right, that's good. All right, so she's saying that public relations fosters civil society by creating bonding and bridging social capital. All right. What else does public relations do to foster civil society?
I'm really interested in thinking about how public relations can help negotiate the competing interests of individuals and groups.
Excellent, excellent. And,
and the outcome of that is fostering civil society.
Excellent. Society is filled with competing interests and competing priorities. Excellent. Okay. What else can we do? Excellent. Okay.
It also, can I add something else?
Sure. Of course.
Public relations also provides unprivileged communities with an alternative to other capitals. I mean, the social capital that public relations provide for unprivileged communities is an alternative to other sorts of capital that powerful actors have.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's good. Anyone else?
I think it's also about trust and for example, I usually talk about my conceptualization using examples. For example, activist groups, that want to engage into the discussion about identities, like minority issues in the United States, for example. And they can use public relations to participate in the discussion about the issue. So they are public relations in this sense, they are using public relations to participate, to get more engaged into the discussion in the civil society. So
Excellent.
It's kind of a relationship building function, but the result is that they participate into the discussion, and during that process, people get to know that issue, get to know that group, and the better results will be building trust and also the identity of that group in the civil society and in the society in general.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I add to this that public relations helps to collectively establish norms and rules in the society. So people agree on how to communicate, how to approach, what is acceptable, what is not, facilitating in this way.
Good. Okay. I'm going to put it to the next slide to show you what I thought. It creates the conditions for open discussion. It informs the public so that they can make informed decisions. It creates a safe space for participation in public discussions. I think public relations at the organizational level helps make the organization open to input and criticism and open to change. And that when issues are discussed and solutions offered by many actors, we actually have better decision making. And we can't stop but realize that the media, whether it's social and digital and old legacy, they also have an important role. And as media becomes more and more threatened as an economic entity, they will rely more and more on public relations materials, information, and access, so that the media are actually relying more and more on public relations to produce news and information. And that is both a great opportunity for public relations and also an incredible challenge. So those are just a few of the things that I thought as well that public relations can do. Now, I want to go back to Eric's piece, because Eric essentially said that public relations as thinking about civil society isn't without its critics. And remember that public relations operates, the discussions that we've been having have been in the normative, right? And so one of the things that you learn as a PhD student is this difference between normative theories and practical theories or positive theories. So normative theories are the idealized way of thinking about something, right? So it's the ideal scenario. Civil society is both normative and practice or positive, because it is an ideal way of how we should function as a society, but at the same time, it's also it's also positive in that we can actually see how it works. So Eric's 2013 piece is essentially arguing for the public sphere and civil society, and arguing that they're actually not, that civil society doesn't have to be treated as this negative thing, that yes, people in the subaltern, which Mohan Datta Bergman often writes about, they have been marginalized, obviously, in societies, but there's actually other ways of thinking about public relations in civil society. And one of the ways that we can actually think about what public relations accomplishes is the idea of capital. And social capital, Shima was mentioning it, social capital is like this invisible wealth of a community. And there's multiple types of capital, right? So most of us, if you look at this slide, most of us think of capital as money, right? We need money. Money helps us to accomplish our goals. But there's other kinds of capital that are more intangible and actually in some cases might be more valuable than economic capital. So cultural capital, it's knowledge that's passed on that enhances somebody's chances for success. So for instance, people who go to certain universities will meet other people, and they will marry those people, right? And then their kids will have opportunities. That's why in some countries it is so competitive to get into the right high school, to get into the right university, because if you do that, you will gain access to this cultural capital. And this cultural capital is really valuable because you meet people, and by meeting people and developing networks, you actually gain resources. The term that public relations has been using mostly has been social capital, and there's all these different definitions of it, but it's really about relationships and networks of information sharing. What we're doing right now today is creating social capital. So Alvin, I don't think you knew Dr. Johnston and Dr. Lane, probably, right?
Yes, I know them.
We know Alvin.
Oh, okay. Oh, rats. Okay, hold on. Erin, here you go, girl. Erin, you don't know Dr. Johnston and Lane, do you?
Erin.
I don't know anyone
Hello,
yet.
Erin.
Hello.
All right.
And Anne had to leave, unfortunately, Maureen. She said to say goodbye and thank you, but yeah, she had to step away for another appointment at 10.
Okay, that's fine. Well, what we're doing right now is we're creating social capital. And so we're developing a network, right? Michael's lecture series, the Sydney lecture series, is not just about helping graduate students better understand the field of public relations, but it's actually creating an informal network that has social capital in it. So that if Erin needs something from Dr. Johnston, or Anna needs something from Alvin, you have these connections, and that you benefit. And it's not, sometimes it is an economic gain, but sometimes it's just knowledge or information, or knowledge and information access is another one. So one of the things that we've been doing, and Eric, Aimee, Adam, and it sounds like a few of you as well, what we've been trying to do is really think about how public relations can be treated as that which creates the social capital that binds a society or groups in society together. And Shima did a really nice job of explaining particularized trust and generalized trust. So this slide goes into a little bit more. I'm sort of referencing both Eric's paper in 2013 and the paper that I wrote with Aimee Yang in communication theory in 2014. Right, the idea that public relations, it creates something in society. It not only affects an organization and its publics, but it affects the broader societal network in which the organization operates. And Alvin, your work on studying how organizations get changed by publics is really interesting, and I can definitely see Aimee Yang's influence in how you're thinking about that. So it's not just that public relations affects the organization or even affects the publics, but what we're arguing is that public relations actually affects the society, that we affect and that we can treat relationships as these things that can be changed based on the communication tactics and strategies that we use, right? So public relations tactics are the things that we do, right? The PR events and activities, and strategies are the things that we attempt to accomplish, to inform, to persuade, to engage, all of those things. And so that public relations, we can create different types of social capital. Now there's two terms here on this slide: bonding social capital and bridging social capital. Shima, why don't you tell me a little bit more about those two different kinds of capital?
Bonding social capital is those strong relationships within groups that actually increases centrality of actors within the group and also increases embeddedness within a group, and trust within a community with strong ties is strong, but those communities are usually disconnected from other communities in society. So this is where bridging social capital comes into play, and public, which is big ties, and it is the function of it is one function of public relations to develop bridging relationships or bridging social capital between different groups in society.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Alvin, do you have anything to add about bonding and bridging social capital?
It's mostly just related to the strong tie and the weak tie.
Mm-hmm.
Network that can use their resources as a group together. And bridging social capital is that network tie that can connect two different clusters so that they're bridging a structural whole so that the different resources can be transferred from one group to the other group of different clusters. Yes.
Ideas?
Well, bonding social capital is more about personal relationships, and bridging social capital is more about speaking with mass audiences, with a lot of the people. So I guess it could be events, media coverage.
All the PhD students right now. Experience either created bonding or bridging social capital?
I think possibly not my work experience, but what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks in the bushfire relief organisation is probably a pretty good example of that, creating an organisation that people then trusted enough to welcome people into their homes. So yeah, I think it created that particularized trust.
Excellent, excellent. When you guys have a chance, look up, is it Lend a Bed? What's the name of the NGO? Lend a Bed. When you have a chance, Google Lend a Bed and Erin Riley, and you're going to see some really interesting application of public relations to contributing to social capital. She's doing some really exciting stuff with the fires. Okay. Dr. Johnson, do you want to add anything about bridging and bonding social capital now that the PhD students have all talked?
No, not really.
Okay. And we do this through information sharing and relationship building. So here's another point of difference as we get ready. We have like 15 minutes left. Is that a lot of times what we need to be doing in the field that will influence the practice is to rethink what public relations outcomes are. Right? So all of us who have worked in public relations, we know that public relations is often evaluated by the amount and the quality of publicity, that an organization's reputation might be another metric that organizations use to look at the public relations function. Or Kim, your research on social license to operate as well, right? That's an outcome of effective public relations. Well, what we want to do, though, is I think we have this opportunity in the field right now to change how we think about public relations outcomes. Of course, publicity, reputation, social license to operate, all of those are valuable organizational outcomes. But I think our chance is right now to teach the next generation of public relations practitioners that the outcome of social capital is as valuable, if not more valuable, as an outcome of public relation. And so that's why I think using a network approach to thinking about public relations is really a paradigm shifter right now. That rethinking it away from being a management approach or a functional approach, and thinking that public relations is also evaluated as a social capital outcome. And that's why I'm going to move now to discussing the Yang and Taylor paper on networks. See right here? This comes, hold on. This might look familiar. This is from the Yang and Taylor paper. And our argument is that public relations actually has the capacity to help all different kinds of levels of relational communication and relationship building. At the egocentric at the level, see that little red dot in the middle? That's the organization. and it has relationships with publics. But then you see some publics have relationships with other publics. And so this is how we're sort of thinking about how public relations works. But the picture next to it is more of a network approach that looks at strong and weak ties, and it looks at how an organization is embedded in a larger network of organizations. And so what we're doing is we're upping the level of analysis about thinking where public relations operates and influences. In the egocentric network on the left, you see that there's sort of a linear relationship between the organization and the publics have relationships with other organizations. And this is great, right? So we can see how our public relations tactics and strategies function. But the ecological level helps us to really think about how the organization is embedded in other networks. And if we treat the relationship of the organization to others as something that can be influenced by public relations, all of a sudden we can start seeing a much bigger picture of how public relations not only influences the organization, but influences society. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And it's funny, Shima, you mentioned strong ties and weak ties. And Alvin, you mentioned early that you take an ecological approach. Well, you're like my ringers, right? Because you weren't supposed to say those things until now, right? Because I was supposed to be bringing you through this journey of how the social network perspective is changing. And unfortunately, which is good, that you guys have already embraced it. So it's not so earth-shattering, my presentation, because the people who are on the call actually are already living this. But you mentioned strong and weak ties. And weak ties are the bridging social capital, right? It's the idea that you have multiple relationships with people who are different from you. And this is so important. Kim Johnston has access to a whole bunch of people. And I can call or email Kim, and she can help me meet somebody. I have access to a whole different group of people than Kim does. She can contact me and I can connect her. Our weak ties, Kim and I have a strong tie to each other, but our weak tie networks are a resource that we can share. Alvin, you're embedded in a network of scholars from IME, me, because I taught IME, Eric and Adam, and then you're embedded in a network at University of Pennsylvania. Right? And so you've got your political communication colleagues and professors who have access to other people. So your embeddedness means that you're gaining all of these resources, these informational resources, which are going to make you a really unique scholar. Shima, you're going to start developing your network here because now you've got Aaron. Aaron is a new PhD student at UTS. And I expect that Michael and I will serve as the structural holes that will connect you two. So that when he knows something, he's going to tell me, and then I'll tell Aaron. Or Aaron will tell me something, and I'll tell Michael. And, we'll essentially benefit. You guys will be the third who benefits. And then, of course, all of us benefit by gaining the intellectual social capital, as well as eventually, like Kim and I have grants together, and we're writing together, and we're doing bushfires work together. And we did our book, of course, together. So these networks really do, at both a personal level as well as at a societal level, have a real value. Okay? Oh, you know what? I'm not going to do that one, I think, because I want to get to the last part. Just one more slide, and then we're going to move to that last part where we talk about, again, what we think and who we are. So what our argument, Yang and Taylor, 2000 and, what was it, 14? Seems so long ago, 15, 5 years ago. We argued that public relations strategies can actually be used to develop different types of strong and weak tie relationships. And that some tactics and strategies are better than others. And that we need to sit down and think, if we want to improve or enhance or strengthen our organization's relationships in a larger network, who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to develop relationships with? What kind of tactics would we use to develop those relationships? So some strategies are really good at looking at strategic ties. Some of them are really good at developing weak ties. And in our paper, we talked about how there's a mix of tactics, and that this is something we would sit down and strategize, just like we would strategize reputation or strategize how we're going to work with the media or engage our publics. We think these are the kinds of conversations that public relations should lead in organizations, taking a much more macro and network view about where you want the organization to end up, and how do you develop relationships across the network to put you into that other position. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then let us continue. Let's see. We have okay, blah, 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 blah. Got that. Okay. All right. Do a couple takeaways, and then I'm going to ask for your feedback and your input, so we treat this as much as a seminar as possible. So the articles that I shared with you, right, were to show you both the conceptual framework underpinning this evolving understanding of public relations and bringing it up to the network level, and that we treat the network paradigm as this path for public relations to think about a larger role for public relations in society. And it helps us just move the understanding, or the level of understanding, away from these dyadic relationships between organizations and publics, and it makes all sorts of different approaches to public relations possible by taking this approach. I tried to argue in my 2011 piece that at the heart of all of this, right, this 11 piece is, what year is it, 2011, sort of, this is right at the beginning of that network turn, that it's rhetoric, right, it's discourse in society, right, that public relations job is to create the conditions in which people can participate. And Shima, I love your discussion about the marginalized and those who don't have voice, and recognizing that public relations can give that voice. So that the 2011 piece is really trying to think about how we facilitate discussions in society that make society a better place to live. And then Eric's piece was really trying to address the idea that civil society is not a dirty term, and that social capital as an outcome of public relations is actually a really great way of thinking what our potential is. And that communities and societies require social capital. Somebody has to create the conditions that allow for it to grow and to change. So, can you see this one?
Yes.
Oh, it's Michael.
No, actually, do you know how hard it was to find a superhero picture in the Creative Commons? For me, public relations has the superhero role in society. If we rethink about what public relations is and can be, and we treat the outcome of public relations, of course, as reputation, social license to operate, but also as that which creates social capital that becomes the foundation of a civil society, it changes us from being mere technicians to essentially being superheroes. And that's how when I think about public relations, and when I teach public relations, and when I talk about public relations and communication in general, I actually just see what an important role that we play in society, and that our job as researchers is to articulate these alternative ways of thinking about public relations and drawing on bigger macro conceptual frameworks to position us not just as those who do, but those who make things happen in society. So we're the superheroes. Public relations serves as a superhero role in society. So we've just got a few minutes left. So I'm not going to make you do this again, but I want you to tell me some of your takeaways from the presentation today, recognizing that this is the first in a series, and the group of people who called in are sort of the choir, right? Most of you have already sort of made this shift in your research. So, maybe this wasn't as enlightening or as earth-shattering as it could have been if you hadn't made those earlier leaps of thinking about PR. But give me a quick takeaway from each one of you of what you learned and how you might move forward based on what you learned today. And don't all rush at once.
I was more oriented towards rhetorical approaches, but after this seminar, I think that relational and network approach is also very interesting. So I might take both these approaches equally in my thesis.
Excellent. And I think they're not mutually exclusive. Rhetoric is the whole foundation of meaning making. So I think it's, you make that assumption and you move forward from it, and then you understand how meaning making is created and changed across networks.
Yes.
Okay. Who's next?
I think I can look more into social capital. Sorry.
No, you go.
Go ahead, Anna, and then Aaron. Anna, then Aaron.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, and it was very nice meeting everyone. So the big takeaway is just meeting people and knowing who is in our big boat. But yeah, I guess what I'm going to do, I'm going to look more at social capital and how do we build it? What do we do with this? How can we do better?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. Social capital. We need a lot of work in it because we essentially have all stuck, right? We all study social capital as trust, but there's got to be other ways of conceptualizing and operationalizing social capital beyond trust. Okay, Aaron?
So there's a lot of theoretical things that I'll take away and sort of explore in these early sort of days of my research. But I think the biggest takeaway for me today is that it's okay to have a really optimistic and positive view of PR and to see it as this valuable and really essential social function. I think sometimes I've been a little overly cynical, and I think that it's been really reassuring to hear that and to see it framed as this really positive thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, superb. Alvin, what about you? You just finished your comprehensive exams.
Yeah, so I was actually really inspired by the Sommerfeld piece. I don't know why I went through it probably 2 years ago and didn't really read it because it's really critical. And I'm a very positive person, so I didn't really read it. But for this class, I read it, and it's very inspiring. And I can see how my current research about the relationship between and among publics can fit into the conceptualization of social capital in public relations. And actually, I think Sommerfeld mentioned in-group and out-group relationships in his writing. And also the Bolton piece, 1997, that you cited about the different definition of like public relations as a function that manage relationships among groups. I think that also indicates that public relations can change the relationships between and within the publics. So I think it really helps me how to conceptualize my current work.
Excellent. Okay, good. All right, Kim, do you want to have the last word?
You know me. I think what this has done for me, apart from revisiting it, it's probably sparked a few research ideas that that can use some of the work that I've done to further, because Anne and I did a piece on relational capital as part of an outcome of engagement, which is really part of social capital. So we tried to draw that link and explore that in a more operationalized way for public relations. And I think what this has done is, apart from ask some hard questions, which I think are really good to be able to, work out in a more explicit way, what are my assumptions about, communication and also public relations and its role, but also where my research can contribute to this ongoing discussion. So yeah, thank you. It's been really, really good, Maureen. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so it looks like we have some real takeaways. So at the end of this, I want you, so the next time you do this will be at the end of February, and it will be another person. In that time period, really start thinking about where you sit in the room of the different conceptual frameworks of public relations. And think about why you got there, how you got there, and just to be able to articulate it, right? So this is like a PhD seminar. So a PhD seminar is so that the students can articulate who they are as a scholar. And then the last thing that I want you to do is to always remember that public relations is a superhero, and that it's up to us when we teach it and when we study it to think about the ways that it contributes to society. I really, I get excited when I talk with undergraduates about what public relations can be, and I hope that you will as well, because some of you are going to be teaching in just a few years, and Kim, you're already teaching, and I'm sure you're already, privileging this superhero role. But that's the end of my presentation. And what I can do is, I know a bunch of you have to go off because you've got other things to do, but I'm happy to answer questions offline. And I'll send each of you those questions that I asked you to ponder so that you really have more time to ponder them. And that remember that your answers will change. The assumptions that you make about communication, which are the fundamental building blocks of understanding public relations, may change as you read more and do more things. And the same thing about how you view public relations role in society. The network role is a great role, but there might be others as well. So I want to wish all of you good luck, and I hope to see you on the next call at the end of February. And I would, if you want to continue this conversation on, online by email, let me know. And Erin, I see you, and Shima, I see you. And Alvin, well, you're like our, you're the father of our cat, so I'll see you as well. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maureen. That's
Thank
been
you.
really good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
All right, take care.
Thank you very
everybody. I'm
much.
gonna go see the recording. All right, bye.
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 Bye bye.